see.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, a lot of these will be, I think, psychology-leaning type questions as opposed to purely philosophy. But that's
they
fine.
look like that. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so, when you're saying something like, okay, so the emotion derives from a percept assessed within a context.
Mm-hmm.
Like for him to say this, it's not like, or whoever's discovered this theory that emotions are derived from thoughts. It's not like he's looked inside himself and said it. So what was the process that someone came up with? What would be a process that someone would use, or a process that someone would follow or did follow to come up with this idea that emotions are derived from thoughts? And all emotions, not just some, but all, because that seems like a more of a leap, right? We discussed that previously, but I was like, how?
I mean, for sure, some observations would be that people react differently to the same situation, that, or at least Brandon gave an example of how three men might react to a woman. Like one person might be in love with her, one might despise her, and one might not care about her at all. Like that would be a more general example. Or when children, they can see something and they don't know what it is, so it doesn't scare them. Like if they see a gun, they won't really know to be scared. It's just a thing, or maybe like any other toy. But if they knew what it was, it might scare them. Or same way with like snakes or spiders, that if they don't know anything about them, they won't be scared. And I think some of that's been validated in psychology, that kids don't demonstrate much of a fear response until after some time about learning about language in the world, and then they can become like having maybe fearful responses. The harder thing is to deal with emotions that seem to come out of just strictly, that don't depend on any kind of learning. Like maybe like being on a cliff can make you feel scared. Like the actual perceptual feeling is scary, and it'd be hard to say, is it the perception that's making you scared? Is your evaluation of seeing that perception that makes you scared? I think that's very difficult, but I think the main thing is generalizing from is when different people react differently to the same object. That you present a different object to them, it's in some way related to what they think about it. And that if you didn't have any thoughts on it, then there would be no response.
Right. So this study on children, are you saying that they do not have any fear response?
I have to look,
at some point early
I
in
have
the
to look it up again, but it's not a response like they'll instinctually run away from a snake or image of a spider, or I have to look more into it, but it's not just merely an inborn trait. Like some people like to say, oh, that children are naturally afraid of spiders, and it's just a natural thing, and that's not from any conscious thing. But it does get some do. And I think there's still maybe some reason to think that. But those are different kinds of feelings. Those almost, like what I was saying, the distinction between a feeling versus the emotion. A feeling could just be that initial, like, whatever your body does in response to physiological aspect. And that's different than the emotion of, you say it makes you feel angry or sad or happy. That's more than merely a physiological response. And there's some evaluation implied when you're talking about emotions, as opposed to merely a feeling or a response feeling.
Would you say a feeling is a broader term subsuming both sensations and emotions? As what else? I don't see what else there would be other than sensations.
It's hard to say. It's more, I wouldn't put it that way, that I wouldn't say emotions are types of feelings, or that feelings are types of emotions. That it's more like they have a causal relationship to each other, but not that these are subsumed by one or the other. I would say they're maybe both subsumed by, or the overarching thing is maybe response or something like that. And there's types of responses. You got feelings, you got emotions, and
Response is pretty
feelings.
broad.
Yeah, that's why I picked that term. But you might think of a better term, but it's not that a feeling is a type of emotion or the opposite way either. I think they're related, but not they have a causal relationship, but it's not that one is a version of the other.
Okay. So a sensation would not include a physiological response, because I think you said feeling is like a physiological
Yeah, the feeling is just
sensation.
physiological, like heart rate goes up, like I don't know, like your hair stand on end and you getting like you maybe get itchy somewhere or blink too much, things like that. That's what I
We,
mean by physiological.
we we can do that devoid of an emotion.
Well, you could think of like an animal if they had a response, they might not have more of value, more cognitive things. Not like is an emotion like what? Because when we say you make you feel sad or happy, it's you're referring to more than the physiological response. You're probably referring to what it makes you think of, what thoughts you have, what concepts it makes you think of. So it would almost imply a more complex thinking mechanism than just feelings. Like whatever in our brain enables us to visualize things, imagine things, think into the future in a way that dogs can't, or a way that mice can't. Do you see what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. So I understand an emotion which includes sensations and physiological responses and intellectual evaluations, but then
Yeah.
I didn't understand what you were saying about feeling. We maybe because this is super detailed, maybe we can cover it another time, but maybe I'll write down. I didn't quite understand the distinction, just so I write it down and I remember I'll come back to it. I'll read it up on it later. What I didn't get what you were saying about like feeling being a physiological response, and then and
Well,
I was trying
feeling
to
just
clarify if
being
it's like I just we don't have to.
literally what you feel in your, like what your body does physically, just like heartbeat, like dilated pupils, things like that.
Oh, okay, devoid of emotion.
Yeah, not no emotion necessarily implied. There might be emotion-like things, but
I
they're
was
not implied by they're
okay,
different,
cool.
that's all.
All right, cool. I will
And there
just
are
so we don't.
psychologists that make a distinction, and I know some threads that has been discussed, the distinction between feeling and emotion.
Ah, cool. So I'll just so yeah, we don't get into that stuck in that rabbit hole. I will write that down. Okay, cool. What about yeah? Okay, so okay, I mean I can see a scenario where okay, there's one person who's scared of snakes and another is not because he's gone out into the jungle and sort of has observed them, started understanding their nature, interacted with them, and then you could say, well, clearly, in that case, emotions are the result of. I mean, clearly, the emotions depend on the experiences and the thoughts of the people. They're not like just this inbuilt thing. But then, you're pointing out in I think you said something about a cliff and like how, when you feel something, how much of that is inbuilt, how much of it is like a reaction to sensations or whatever. I didn't, something like that. And then, a mood might be another example, or like, um, when you just suddenly feel a mood, but you can't point at anything specific. Um, and so it's hard. What I'm wondering then is like, okay, we definitely see instances of emotions deriving from thoughts and experiences or thoughts about those experiences. But then in those instances where there isn't that clear connection, even sometimes when you have an emotion and the source isn't clear, like how did they, how did they validate that yes, okay, it still derives from a thought. It still derives from an experience in which was thought over or reflected on. Like, do you get what I'm saying?
I think so. That
Basically, like you can see some instances where emotions are derived from thoughts, but in others you
Yes.
can't. There's no clear line where you go, oh, okay, it's because of that. Sometimes it's just an emotion. And so in those instances, how would you validate? Like, yeah, this is still derived from thought, it's just the source is not obvious.
I mean, I think you would have to, well, first try to do it. I get on. It's hard to think of an example where you couldn't do that. I'm trying to think of examples of emotions that seem to be stemming from themselves and from their own nature and not from any evaluation. I mean, all I can think of is examples like you might feel fear if you've been actually wounded. I can imagine that can induce fearful emotions, even, but it wouldn't be really an evaluation of your wound as much as the wound itself caused you to be more vigilant about your surroundings. It upped your awareness of different of time. Maybe it enhanced your, maybe through your adrenaline, it made your mood more irate and irritable just as a response. And you would say, oh, your anger, it's not because you evaluated anything that way. It was just your injury that caused that, literally. And it would be hard. And I would say, just in case like that, well, no, it's not. That emotion wasn't an evaluation. So I'm not sure if we can claim that every single emotion we can think of will not have or will be an evaluation. I think maybe Rand didn't quite appreciate these underlying physiological responses that do constitute human nature.
Right.
Not that it invalidates anything about reason, just that there are more considerations about our mental mechanisms than Rand gave credit to, at least regarding emotion. There's more to deal with than just I have emotions and evaluations. Like sometimes you need to sort through what your body's doing as a
I
response to your environment versus a response to your thoughts.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about it now. I suppose the broader, the principle, the real important thing in this part is that there are um, the volitional parts are what's important. So obviously, there may be we don't know, or at least I haven't validated this. It's not clear to me that all my emotions are derived from thoughts, but I know that some are, and so I mean that's the main principle here. Some are, and then the thought of like whether all of them are or not is a sort of a more higher level question. Um,
Yeah, or more so because the volitional aspects are where we care about reason, and as far as our reasoning goes, we only would want to consider not, we're not trying to say the emotions themselves have content that have answers as much as when we have emotions, to the extent there's volition related to it, we can control them. We know that where they're coming from, that they're not, our reasoning isn't causing or isn't being caused by emotions, that we're not just merely emotional creatures, but that we're rational animals that make use of our emotions as information. We just need to know what,
yeah, continue. Sorry.
yeah, we just need to know what the emotions tell us. It's not so much what, like being able to use them the right way.
You said emotions don't have content or something like that.
Well, I think I misspoke. The emotions, the, what was I trying to say?
I think you were trying to say it's not a source of knowledge, which is why you
Yeah,
missed.
it's not a source of knowledge. So we know that it's nothing related to like how we come to concepts or knowledge or anything like that. There's something else. So we can't use them. They don't have that kind of conceptual content
Right.
that we can use to for cognition or for anything like that. We can recognize that they are quick responses, and many of them are the volitional related ones are, we can know what they were caused by, and the ones that we know what they're caused by, we know how to use that information. and apply it to our lives.
How do you, when you're saying that they don't have content or that they're not sources of knowledge, is that reached by just saying, okay, well, sometimes they're wrong? Or how is, because there's also people who talk about not just an emotion but an intuition, like I had a feeling this would happen. So it's still an emotion, but I would say the distinction is more like you anticipate something, so that's like almost, it appears like a form of knowledge. So how would you think about that?
Usually for those, I would respond by saying the way you've come to understand the truth of it isn't, you'd have to be using a different way of thinking. You can't, it's not any way that's necessarily connected to reality. It's not in a way that can be validated. The emotion itself isn't, you don't validate an emotion really. You either have it or you don't. It's not like it tells you about truth. It doesn't tell you about these things. And only reason can tell you what like the truth of something is or whether it's connected to reality. The emotion itself isn't necessarily a truth about reality. It's where the way things seem to be are really what they are, at least just when it comes to just our emotions. They don't have enough about it. They seem to only derive from, well, it doesn't tell us anything like knowledge does.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's in this first, what you're saying is basically this first paragraph that I've quoted, which is most of the content at any time is not present in conscious awareness, but it is real and operative nonetheless. So you're just making that distinction that the emotion, the intuition, whatever you want to call it, is not the evaluation itself, but the response to some kind of process of evaluation. The evaluation which is based on content which was acquired at another time.
Yes.
And so because it's some automatic thing that happens, we just notice ourselves reacting and feeling this thing called an emotion. We know that it's not, it's it's based on a content, and so it's not that we don't know yet if that content is true or not. So that's sort of what.
Yeah, also that knowledge is only volitional. We can only get to knowledge with volition. And I mean, that's more the claim that goes before this, that the only way to acquire, there are means of using our consciousness and all that is how we get knowledge. And if knowledge without volition is, I don't know what you'd even call it, it'd be just something else. You don't talk about it like knowledge. It's just something else entirely. We only talk about knowledge and concepts to the extent that we need a method to acquire these concepts. There's a method to develop them. There's a method to validate them. The only question would be not if, would be, do emotions too have contact with reality? But there's nothing that we would say about them that makes them necessarily true or makes them infallible in the sense that perceptions are. Like the way a stick looks in water is just the way it looks in water. That's just a fact of it. But it's not like an emotion that seeing a stick in water makes you angry. It's not just the way sticks in water are. It can vary depending on the person, your mood, the time of day. It doesn't tell that same invariant, unvarying thing about reality. So that's one reason we could say that whatever emotions are, they don't necessarily put us into contact with reality. That's not a starting point, nor could it be. We would have to make some connection with perception. And that's where you would have to say what relationship do emotions have with perception. It doesn't seem like they can be taken away from evaluations.
Do you two things I want to say. Sorry, I need to write it down. Earlier you said something like there's no such thing as non-volitional knowledge, but I'd say perception is non-volitional knowledge. Like, wouldn't you say that?
I
Like if I
think there's some
just,
disagreement on whether we want to call that knowledge. I know
okay,
that Brandon didn't want to call it knowledge.
got it.
Like he specifically mentioned, he doesn't. It's not knowledge, but it's not. I'll define the quote later. I know we mentioned something specific in respect to that exact question.
And the second part was, in this book, it obviously began by validating. Well, I think it was objectivity first, right? So a method of, which is described as what is it? A normative term, so an evaluative term, one of measurement of the
Yes.
relationship between a mind and its content and reality. So we're talking about,
Yes.
emotions and their contents and so on.
Yes.
But it really began with like, okay, so perceptions, concepts, and then logic. Um, but it left emotions till later. Like, so do you think it began, people began by trying to validate or use reason, or did they, because it's almost like, where would you begin if you didn't have, obviously I'm reading through this book, but if I didn't have all this, like, it just seems like insanely difficult for me to know where to begin. Like, is an emotion a source of knowledge, or is my reason a source of knowledge? Um, would you first validate reason and say, well, I don't know yet what emotions are, I'll come to them later? Or would you, I don't know if this question makes any
Well,
sense
I
to
would
you.
almost even go before reason, just answer what is truth in the first place.
So, sorry, could you repeat that? You don't
Like
know
I
what?
would go more even before that, just what is truth? Like you're asking how do I know what's like brings me contact or whatever with reality, but then you're even trying to ask what is true anyway. Like you're just trying to
No, I don't know
define.
if I am. I'm trying to ask, what is a source of truth? So I know what truth is. It's correspondence through, it's, yeah, actually, I guess that is a question of perception, right? So correspondence to reality, I'm assuming that that's what it is. So perception, being in contact with reality, the thing that I see. So my perception is the base, but then I'm questioning, like, what, how do you know to begin? I'm just questioning, like, you start looking into emotion later and going, okay, it's not a source of knowledge, or do you start questioning it earlier? Because it's not, it's just not obvious if you don't have all this knowledge and someone telling you, okay, emotions are derived from ideas. At least it wouldn't be for me.
I would almost just start by distinguishing. I kind of would start with emotion, but more like I would try to distinguish at least first what sort of mental states there are, which Peacock clearly didn't do here. He just talked about reason, then now some emotion. Like I would
Okay.
rather do like a broad overview of the different kind of categories of thought, like intuition, emotion, reasoning, deliberation, things like that. I would have rathered that, and then we would talk about how to distinguish those first rather than just going right into reason.
Okay.
That's what I
Well,
would prefer.
in this book, he said, by the way, that intuition reduces to emotion. Everything just reduces to emotion. Thoughts?
I would call that a third category, personally.
Okay,
There's
cool.
too many what ifs about that. I think I consider it a third category.
Yeah, okay. Um, what's your thought on, um, you know, fear of the unknown, which I don't like, by the way. So, but I'm curious, if we're talking about, because it's almost like in that case, you're talking about lack of content, and then you're fearing it. So, what do you think of that?
I usually think of it as a form of anxiety, as an over imagining the future or excessive imagination in the future in a sense that you're imagining things in a vivid way that you have no basis to predict, usually, or maybe not no basis, but you're exaggerating your predictions in a way that you're fearful of what you think might happen. You're fearful of what you picture.
Can you give me an example?
Like you can be afraid that you won't get your job and you're going to be end up homeless and living in your car and never going to have a nice meal again. And you're just all worried that this job has to go perfect, that you have to get it. And you be all anxious about it, that you're thinking about all the time. You're worried that you're not going to get it. You're mixing everything that could go wrong. and then you'll be anxious of what might happen, what could happen if things didn't go right.
Okay, so you'd say commonly that's what people mean when they refer to fear
Yes.
of the unknown. So it is, there
Yeah.
are specific things, but you're saying there's some kind of process of imagining on the basis of, I don't know,
Just whatever
like,
prediction they make.
yeah,
Like just a what if turned into they're making it so vivid that they get themselves afraid of it.
right. So out of like a million what ifs, which you can't anticipate, you're taking one negative one and you're kind of just imagining a million different scenarios.
Yeah, usually. Or
And
just
then,
yeah.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I'm saying.
And then, so it's not actually when someone says fear of the unknown, they're not referring to response to lack of content. They're referring to something specific, but they're just again, as in the example of the guy who talks about frequencies and negative energies, they're just referring to something else. When they say fear of the unknown, so there's no such thing as fear of the unknown. There's not like you walk into a room that's void and you're scared of it because it's a void.
Yeah, it's imagining what's the void tells you, or you imagine in the void is what scares you.
Like, yeah,
That's yeah, like you're scared of the fact that all your values will disappear. Like
yeah. So it's
the
fear of, so that's fear. So it is fear of something. It's fear of death.
yeah, I think usually when you ask somebody about their anxiety emotions, it's usually going to be referring to what when they say I don't know what my future will be. Like I mean, you could be sort of the blankness you could be afraid of. Like I'm afraid that there is nothing. But it is weird to think about though. Like, could you ever be really afraid of something that literally is not there, but
Yeah.
expecting something to be there, but it's not being there is the thing you imagine?
Well, I think you got closer there with what you said, actually. It's closer, like, as opposed to the example you said, like, I'm not going to get this job or whatever. I would say that's a
Yeah,
specific fear. Almost
yeah,
whatever people mean by fear of the unknown, you got closer with that example of, like, I don't know what will happen, which is
yeah.
still not an identification, though. So, uh, I don't know. It's kind of weird to think about, like,
The not knowing what will happen could be like being afraid that there will be no answer, being afraid that
answer to what?
um, like you're afraid about the unknown is scary because you want to be able to predict the future, maybe. The unknown is scary because you want information to know what's coming, but then when you don't have it, you just go haywire on what could happen.
Do you, now that I think about it, maybe what it is lack of self-confidence, as in,
Partly.
I mean, deeper than lack of self-confidence, but like not being able to handle the various things that reality will throw at you, and so you want um, you want that job or whatever it is because you don't you're worried that you won't be able to successfully produce or work or survive yourself in different situations by using your mind. Man, I don't know, mate. I'm just speculating, so I'm just trying to because that we're talking about like emotions being responses and based on content. So fear of the unknown is something that has stuck out for me as interesting. Is like response to lack of content.
Yeah, almost like you're being limited to what you have now. That in a way it could be like you're afraid of the now. Like you want it to be different, but you don't have anything to use to predict a different future. So all you have is the now. And the now doesn't make you feel happy, so you'll just feel bad.
What we're talking about identifying the source of emotions as well, and in some cases it's easy. And you gave a few different examples. What about you would know? I'm asking you because obviously studying psychology, like generalized anxiety, or I don't know if that's the right term. I've just heard this
Mhm.
stuff where someone like feels a. Actually, Edgar Allan Poe wrote about that. It talks there's not in fictional books, you get these people that like hear noises and this kind of the world like just compresses in on them and there's sweat coming down their brow and they don't know what it is. What's that? Because there's no
Not knowing,
like
not knowing what it is more like that regardless of what you're consciously thinking of, that's your emotions, your subconscious responding to the world around you. Like your whole self is responding to the world, not just what you're directly volitionally considering right now, what you're directly aware of. I mean, your body's still responding to different stimuli, hunger, thirst, or anything else. And I think it'd even be responding to maybe stresses in your life that, if somebody asks you for too many things to do for work, or somebody you're in love with that's acting all mean to you, and all these things can just build up even when affecting you, even when you're not thinking about them directly. And a generalized anxiety is like you can't push down those feelings long enough. You can't erase them, or you can't dispel them because you don't know how to resolve them.
and maybe you don't know their source. Do you know a guy called Irvin Yalom?
No.
He's a existential psychotherapist, and I watched a little clip that he had on YouTube. It was like 2 minutes, and he was interviewing this girl in therapy, and she was saying, "Yeah, so I was walking down the street, and then I asked, like, why am I even wearing this dress? What difference does it make if I wear this dress or that dress? Like, why are we even here?" And you can see she's like feeling anxious already, and I guess that's when I think of like existential anxiety, I think of that. But like, what it's so weird because there's not like a snake. Oh, here's the snake. This is the source. No,
Yeah.
there's mental content, and then I'm making an evaluation of something. In that case, like, wow, what even is the evaluation? What is being evaluated, and what is the contents? Like, that's I don't know.
I think the contents would be wider abstractions like purpose, meaning, life, things like that, that you've taken it to a more abstract level, away from the concrete, more abstract. So it influences more things. Because being more generalized, being more abstract, there's more concepts connected to it.
And then so it's pretty difficult to pinpoint what exactly triggers
Yeah,
those.
because there's so
So
many things, so many referents. Like I think of life, like how do you use to refer to life? Well, there's hundreds of things, or what do you do to refer to your purpose? You could think of, probably can think of forever thinking things that have influenced the way you act. And just so many connections
mm,
to that.
mm,
Rather than say you're just thinking about the way your car annoys you, like it won't start or breaks down a lot or something. Like it's much more narrow on what could go wrong, or the things about it that can bother you. But if you go to more generals like work, like your car bothers you about your work, or what you're studying for your work is bothers you, or the people at work you don't respect, or you're not respected at home, or like all these things are affecting your attitude towards work. It's not, it's
right.
more abstract because there's more going into it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the second part that I bolded about what makes an emotion incomprehensible to many people is the fact that their ideas are not only largely subconscious but also inconsistent. Um, what the incomprehensibility of that then is the fact that because it's inconsistent, it's hard to pinpoint. Like in that example I gave you of the girl who was very anxious and experiencing existential anxiety, it's that sometimes she doesn't feel that, and sometimes it will just overcome her. Is that's what they mean, right? Like, there's no, that's what makes it incomprehensible because it's so hard to then deduce or like infer what is the source of this.
Yeah, I think so. And there was an example of that in, I think maybe Peikoff used it too, about emotions. Let me look at this really quick. Talk about contradictions. For instance, an aesthete finds himself attracted to
A what?
brain.
Sorry?
An aesthete, like an aesthetic monk or something. Like they don't
I
do
don't know what that
anything.
is. Oh,
Like
they got it.
no pleasures, nothing, just
Yeah. Okay.
online. Imagine an aesthete finds himself attracted to a brainless woman he professes to despise, and evading the knowledge that he is indifferent to or frightened by any woman of mental stature, dreading the admission of what he seeks is proof of his masculinity, and that by his standards only a brainless woman can give to him, wishing never to know that the brainless woman is the soulmate of his deepest values, of his secret self. He cries that his body is an instinct-ridden machine moved by desires unrelated to the content of his mind, and evades the question of why his instincts made that sexual choice for him and no other. And that made me think when we say Musashi was hurting himself over having these sexual desires about a woman, like hurting himself, blaming himself, and that's
Oh, you're
kind of
talking
like
about the scene with that priest that I sent you.
the priest, yeah.
Hmm. What's that from? Where'd you quote it? Can you send that to me?
But that was the vision of Ayn Rand also.
What's that? Is that the Nathaniel Grander book?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
So basically the idea that he's not paying attention to the fact that he doesn't even want to pay attention to a woman of some moral stature or anything like that. And then the only woman he would value is a brainless woman who has no values really. And then he's surprised that he's attracted to such a woman. Well, he's denying everything that would make such a woman a good woman attractive.
I need
Like
to
he's
read that. It's hard when you just if
yeah,
you my brain needs time to like slowly read through things to. I've
okay.
I've read some of Ayn Rand's stuff on sex, and I've always found it like it's a bit speculative because like there's a large biological component, and so I found it like a bit. I'll cool, thanks. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I will